It started as a routine trip, something I had done 100 times before. I was driving back from my parents' house late one Friday night, a trip that usually took about 3 hours. The road was one of those backcountry highways, dark, isolated, and with miles of dense forest on either side. I had driven this route so many times that I could almost do it in my sleep. But that night, something felt different. The air felt heavy, and the darkness seemed thicker, more oppressive than usual. I kept telling myself that it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew something was off. About an hour into the drive, my car started acting up. The engine made a sputtering noise, and before I knew it, the car slowed to a stop. I tried restarting it, but it was dead. Nothing. Not even a click. My heart sank as I realized I was stranded in the middle of nowhere. I checked my phone, hoping to call for help, but there was no signal. That wasn't surprising given the remoteness of the area, but it added to the growing sense of dread. I sat there for a moment, trying to think of what to do next. The nearest town was about 15 miles back, and I hadn't seen another car for miles. Walking back wasn't an option, and staying in the car didn't seem much better. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, hidden in the darkness just beyond the reach of my headlights. That's when I saw it, a faint light flickering through the trees on the side of the road. It wasn't too far away, maybe a 10-minute walk. I figured it might be a house or a cabin, and if I was lucky, someone who could help me. I grabbed my flashlight from the glove compartment and started walking toward the light, hoping for some kind of assistance. The forest was unnervingly quiet. Every crunch of leaves under my feet seemed deafening in the stillness. The trees loomed overhead, their branches twisting into strange shapes that seemed to move in the corner of my eye. As I got closer to the light, I realized it wasn't coming from a house, but from an old, run-down gas station. The building looked like it had been abandoned for years, with cracked windows and ivy crawling up its walls. But the light was definitely on. A flickering neon sign buzzed weakly, casting an eerie glow on the cracked pavement. I hesitated for a moment, but figured I had no other option. I walked up to the door and pushed it open. The inside was dusty and filled with old, outdated items. Cans of motor oil, stacks of faded magazines, and rows of candy bars that were probably older than me. The shelves were covered in a thick layer of dust, and the air was musty, as if no one had been inside for years. But what struck me most was the sense of time having stopped here, like this place had been frozen in the past. There was a counter near the back, with an old-fashioned cash register sitting on it. I walked up to it, hoping to find someone, but the place was empty. Then I noticed something strange. There were fresh footprints in the dust on the floor. They led from the door to the counter, and then disappeared behind it. My heart started pounding as I realized that someone had been here recently. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding small and hollow in the empty store. There was no answer. I walked around the counter and saw a door slightly ajar. The light from the flickering sign outside barely illuminated the room beyond. I pushed the door open and was met with a cold, musty draft. Inside, there was nothing but a staircase leading down into what looked like a basement. I don't know why I went down there. Every instinct was screaming at me to leave, to go back to the car and wait until morning. But my curiosity got the better of me. The stairs creaked under my weight as I descended. The basement was dark and damp, with the only light coming from the dim glow of my flashlight. The air down there was thick, almost suffocating. The walls were lined with old, rusted shelves, and the floor was covered in dirt and debris. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I heard a faint sound, like someone whispering. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I followed the sound to a door at the far end of the basement. It was slightly open, and the whispering grew louder as I approached. The door looked ancient, with peeling paint and rusted hinges. I could barely make out the words being whispered, but they sounded like a chant, repeating over and over in a language I couldn't understand. I slowly pushed the door open, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. What I saw inside made my blood run cold. The room was small, with stone walls and a dirt floor. In the center of the room was a small table with a single, flickering candle on it. Around the table sat 3 figures, their faces obscured by the shadows. They were whispering in low voices, their words indistinguishable, but it felt like they were speaking directly to me. The air was thick with tension, and I could feel my breath catching in my throat. As I stood there, frozen in place, one of the figures slowly turned its head toward me. I could just make out a pair of glowing eyes in the darkness. They weren't like human eyes. They were too large, too bright, and filled with an unnatural light. The figure seemed to be staring right through me, as if it could see into my soul. I stumbled back, my flashlight slipping from my hand and clattering to the floor. The whispering stopped abruptly, and the room fell into an eerie silence. Panic surged through me, and I turned to run, but the basement door slammed shut with a deafening bang. I pounded on the door, trying to force it open, but it wouldn't budge. The whispering started again, louder this time, almost chanting. I pressed myself against the door, my heart racing, and suddenly everything went silent. I slowly turned around, dreading what I might see. The figures were gone. The room was empty except for the table and the flickering candle. The air was thick with the smell of something burning, and I realized that the candle was almost out. I grabbed my flashlight and tried the door again, and this time it opened. I ran up the stairs 2 at a time, not daring to look back. When I burst out of the gas station, the night air hit me like a punch. I ran back through the forest, not stopping until I reached my car. I yanked the door open, jumped in, and tried the ignition. The car started up immediately, purring like nothing had ever been wrong. I floored the gas pedal and sped down the road, not daring to look in the rearview mirror until I was miles away. When I finally glanced back, the light from the gas station was gone. The road was as dark and empty as it had been before. I drove straight home that night, not stopping until I was safe inside my apartment. I locked the door and sat down on the couch, trying to make sense of what had happened. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me, something unseen but ever-present. Over the next few days, strange things started happening. I would hear whispers in the middle of the night, faint but unmistakable. They were the same whispers I had heard in the basement, and they would come from just outside my bedroom door. I would lie in bed, paralyzed with fear, listening to the voices as they grew louder and more insistent. Sometimes I would catch glimpses of shadows moving out of the corner of my eye, but when I turned to look, there would be nothing there. One night, I woke up to the sound of something scratching at my window. I lived on the 3rd floor, so there was no way it could have been a tree branch or an animal. The scratching was slow and deliberate, like someone was trying to get in. I lay there, my heart pounding, too terrified to move. The scratching continued for what felt like hours, but when I finally worked up the courage to look, there was nothing there. The window was closed, and the curtains were undisturbed. I tried telling myself that it was all in my head, that I was just imagining things, but the fear was real. It felt like whatever I had encountered in that gas station had latched onto me, and it wasn't going to let go. I became paranoid, jumping at every little noise and constantly looking over my shoulder. I stopped sleeping, too afraid of what I might see if I closed my eyes. The final straw came a week later. I was in my apartment trying to relax when I heard a knock at the door. It was late, past midnight, and I wasn't expecting anyone. I looked through the peephole, but there was no one there. I stood there for a moment, my hand on the doorknob, trying to decide what to do. Then the knock came again, louder this time, and I felt a cold breeze blow through the apartment. I slowly opened the door, expecting to see an empty hallway, but instead, I was met with a figure standing just outside. It was one of the figures from the basement, its glowing eyes staring at me with an intensity that made my blood run cold. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. It just stood there, watching me. I slammed the door shut and locked it, but I knew it was too late. Whatever this thing was, it had found me. That night, I packed a bag and left the apartment. I drove until dawn, not caring where I ended up as long as it was far away from that place. I've never been back to that town, and I never will. I don't know what I encountered that night, but it's something that will haunt me for the rest of my life. Sometimes, late at night, I'll be lying in bed, and I'll hear those whispers again, faint but unmistakable. And I'll wonder if I really did escape that night, or if a part of me is still trapped in that basement, forever caught in that moment of terror.